Um, okay, everybody. Today, inshallah, as I mentioned in the email, we will discuss a very important topic that is related directly to the research integrity, and it is also related directly to the research ethics. And in this, we will discuss what is research management and sharing. And by the end of the sessions, we will discuss together the advantages of sharing data and the challenges of sharing data together, inshallah. But first of all, I'd like to ask you in general, what is the type of data you are dealing with in your research? Like in my field, I usually deal with health records to take data from health records. Sometimes we take data from patients. Most of the time it is like an observational data. What's about your research field? Like Dr. Sasson, I think you are working on a genetic lab.
Yeah.
So what type of data you are dealing with?
Well, actually, we work now on collecting blood samples and urine samples and samples from from clinical patients in hospitals, because we're studying some of the human pathogens. So we have tons of data, but the thing is sometimes it's really missing major parts, like you can find the gender and the age, but you cannot find the history of the patients, or like some things is really crucial for some patient to know how we can correlate the infection that they have with the disease that they have, or the disease that they have submitted to the hospital for. So sometimes it's really hard to do that. And since we're collecting these data, we're asking to get all the full information about the patient. So we take it indirectly from the hospital, since the patient already signed an informed consent with the hospital when they got admitted in.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Sosan. And other colleagues here, Dr. Said, you are working as a pediatrician, like Dr. Sarah and Dr. Maha also. And I think most of your data is taken from patients, or you do some experiments on a lab?
Actually, most of my research work in Egypt is about I'm collecting clinical data, but I worked on laboratory during my 2 years scholarship in Japan.
It was a lab work in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Like most of clinicians in Egypt didn't or don't do a lab work. Most of the work is on.
It's unusual for clinicians to do lab work.
Yes, I see. It's costly and expensive. I understand. So the data that we can deal with it ranges from just records, from it may be samples, like what Dr. Salsam mentions. It may be biological samples. Some researchers work on geological samples. Other work in ancient earthcraft samples. Data may be images, maybe videos, maybe audio records, maybe softwares. So data is like a wide range of things that we can hear. Data can be defined as measurement or observations or any other primary product of research activities. And as I mentioned earlier, data are the empirical base for scientific finding, like the integrity of the data will reflect the integrity of the scientific research is reflected by the integrity of the data. And as you mentioned, that data are not numbers and a lab notebook, or not a numbers on a software. Data could be ranged from images, videos, and etc. Also, it have different definitions, like the National Institute of Health define the data that it is recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community as necessary to document and support research findings. According to the National Science Foundation, data are something that is determined by the community of interest through the process of peer review and the program management. So the definition of data could be differed according to the institutions or according to the agency. Here we have a short movie that discusses the process of data sharing and data management. I would like to hear this video together and then discuss the advantages and disadvantages from your point of view that is associated with data sharing.
Hi, Colette. How'd the presentation go?
Really well.
Hey, first paper down.
First paper. Oh, I was so nervous, but when I got to the room and saw there were people actually sitting there, I calmed down and I read the paper.
Good for you.
Oh, there were some really great questions, and Dr. St. John at Roper Labs actually asked me to share our data. I've been getting it ready to send since I got back.
Hold on. You copied the lab books and are sending them to Roper Labs?
Yeah, isn't that great?
Dr. Van is letting you do that?
She let me do the paper.
So you didn't ask her? I wouldn't send this without her permission. You know she's working on a patent.
But she said it was fine that I did the paper. That means she's okay about sharing. I'm absolutely sure. Anyway, this is all my work.
Testing her ideas. Just a word to the wise, ask her.
I already told Dr. St. John I was sending it. I'll look like such a fool if Van says no.
Better a fool with Roper than in trouble with Dr. Van. You've got a lot to lose.
I'm not listening to you. The university policy is 90 days, and it's been at least 6 months. It's in the mail. So, what happened while I was gone?
Not much. My research is going great. The curve is perfect.
So, you solved that outlier problem?
Yeah, it wasn't that much. Very minimal.
You were really frustrated last week.
I was freaking myself out over nothing. I decided it was the margin of error in the testing. Once I realized that, I went back over all the data, and everything just cleaned itself up. Like I said, a perfect curve.
That's great.
Colette's back. So how did it go?
I gotta get to class.
Oh, just a second, Henry. I read your preliminary report and checked the lab book. Good job. No one has ever gotten such clear data in that area before. Always plagued with outliers. Let's talk more about this. I'm really impressed.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
So tell me.
It went really well. Dr. St. John at Roper was particularly interested.
Of course she was. That's her field.
She asked me to share our data.
Absolutely not.
The university policy is 90 days. Aren't we required?
The private sector gets 2 years. Dr. Sarojini St. John? You decided on your own to share data with a competitor?
Well, I only included what you agreed I could reference in my paper.
You know I'm working on a patent. I thought I could trust you. This is an opportunity to make some real money. Don't you have the brains to realize it's not a question of sharing so much as being robbed?
So this is the end of the video, and I would like to discuss with you the issues that raised in that video. To summary what happened in that video, here is a student which is working with her supervisor or her mentor on a lab, and she copied the lab work and she is going to send it to another professor, maybe in another institution, without the permission of her supervisor. What would you think? What is the problems, or what is the let's discuss first what is the benefits of sharing data and what is the challenges of sharing data from your point of view. Would you think that the student is in a real trouble? So you are agree with what happened?
I agree she's in trouble.
Okay, Dr. Maha, why do you think that she is in trouble?
Because she agreed to send data to another institution without taking the permission, and now her supervisor refused this sharing of data, which is her right, I guess, because these are her ideas and her lab works.
Yes, I agree with you, but on the other side, would you think that the researchers shouldn't share their data?
They should, but in light of collaboration and agreement between each other. It's not like I can send my data or my supervisor data to anyone.
Yes, I agree with you. Other thoughts?
I think you can share your data after you publish it. Like some websites now have the opportunity that you can share your data with peer reviews, so they can give you an idea about how you're doing in your research, and after that you get prepared to publish this research or this data. But sometimes it can backfire, like what happened in the video, I think.
So, Dr. Sasan, what do you think the solution for this problem? How we can manage data from the start?
First of all, I tell all my students, my postgraduate students, you have to have a lab notebook and you have to maintain it, and I have to review it every single time that you're doing an experiment to make sure that you're doing it right, because some of them, they feel so much pressure of making mistakes and not correcting it or trying to cover it. So I felt the researcher number one, he was covering the problem with the outlier, and he just wrote in the lab notebook what he thought it's right. And I think that I felt it's something fishy. It's like he's doing falsification of the data or something. I didn't believe that he really managed to do it well, because data is data, numbers is numbers. So numbers are numbers. So my thinking is, first, keep a lab notebook, keep it updated with your supervisor. Supervisor has to be very close to the student, so they don't let them go wander by themselves, or having questions and not ask them first or ask the permission first. The student had the policy of the university, but she didn't bother to take permission from her supervisor. She was so excited to share all the data that she had, and she's excited to present her work. And I'm sure that the other professor showed very interest in the data. That's why it got her encouraged to do that. Besides that, I really didn't like the way that the supervisor spoke to the researcher. Even though that she made a huge mistake, she cannot tell her that you don't have a brain. You cannot do... Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Sasan. So the next question, who should own the data? Maybe in that case, who should own the data? The student or the supervisor, the institution? Or who should own the data, or who should have the permission to, or who should have the permission to share data or to not share data? The student or the supervisor?
The institution. The institution has the copyright for the lab notebook and for all the data before published and after publication, I think.
Yes. Okay, Dr. Sasan, in Ain Shams University, do you have like a data management plan that you agreed before collecting data or before going to research work?
What do you mean by data management plan?
Like before starting the research, you sat together and you put a plan. Here is the data that we will collect, and this is the way that we will manage the data, and this is the person who will owns the data, and we can share the data with institution 1, 2, 3. We cannot share data with institution 1, 2, 3. It's like a plan, management plan, before even starting the research work. Do you have anything like that?
Okay, at first, when I said what I said, I was speaking about the Ohio State University, because that was I was told there. It's a property of the university. But when I said with my students, we agreed on that. When we have like a departmental meeting, we have everybody to share what their students working on, and it shouldn't be having all the copyrights and privacy until the research is done, and making sure that plagiarism is checked and published before we can share it with anybody else. Even in conference, we don't share the whole information. It's not about being greedy or something like that. It's really nice to share the information, but can you imagine if Watson and Crick shared their information with the other people in the lab beside them? They wouldn't get the Nobel Prize.
Really? MashaAllah. Okay, so what about the experience on Iran, Jelena, and the experience on South Africa, Dr. Thomas and colleagues from Africa? Do you have anything you'd like to share with us about that issue?
Anyway, okay.
Yes,
No,
Thomas.
you go first. You go first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Thomas, go on.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, for Gambia here, with regards to our university, I'm not aware of any document that states about ownership of information. There might or might not be, but I'm not aware of that. Most of us are involved in our own individual research, not funded by the university. So that is a different scenario.
Yes, I see. Actually, my institution, I'm working at a university in Egypt. Like no one before asked us to do a data management plan, maybe except if we got fund from a international organization like WHO, they may ask us for a data management plan. So data management may be a requirement from the funder.
Yes.
Start. Yes, thank you very much. Who'd like to say other thing? Maybe Dua from Dubai or Julana from Iran?
Yes. Here I work with the Research Institute. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Go on, please.
I work with the Research Institute, and here we have students who are doing their research for their master's degree or PhD degree, but the data belongs to the institution. So they have like a student contract when they come to the institution, and then everything is written down, that how you use it, how you share it, and who can access this information. It's also written in their research proposal as well, who deals with data, how secure you keep it, where do you keep it, and who can access to this. For example, during the research, it's the research investigator, and if the student is collecting some of the data, they can share like in an Excel file. She can send to the principal investigator, and then at the end, for the results and everything, they have a written contract with the institution that at the end it belongs to the institution.
So thank you, Jelana, for sharing that experience.
You're welcome.
Okay, so based on our discussion, I think all of you agree that we should share data, but with restrictions or with a pre-planned management plan. Okay. Why should I manage data? We should manage data because it is a part of the transparency process and the integrity and research. Also, it's a part of a compliance with the regulation. Founders like NIH said that data sharing is essential for research that results in knowledge or product and the procedures to improve human health. So NIH, if you got fund from NIH, NIH had the right to ask you for the data or to share your data. Also, private sectors, maybe like the American Heart Association, also require certain applicant to follow a certain process or to follow a certain data policy if you get fund from them. What if we don't have a plan to data management and data sharing? Here is another video. We can say it's funny video, okay, that discuss the issues of if the researcher have no plan to manage his or her data. I'd like all of you to see this video together, and then we will discuss the pitfalls.
Hello. My name is Dr. Judy Benign. I'm an oncologist at NYU School of Medicine.
Hello, Dr. Judy Benign.
I read your article on B cell function.
I just wanted to be sure the sound is clear this time.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Think that I could use the data for my work on pancreatic cancer.
I am not an oncologist.
I know, but I think I could use... Hello. My name is Dr. Judy Benign. I'm an oncologist at NYU School of Medicine.
Hello, Dr. Judy Benign.
I read your article on B cell function. I think that I could use the data for my work on pancreatic cancer.
I am not an oncologist.
I know, but I think I could use the data for my work on pancreatic cancer. Do you have the data?
Everything you need to know is in the article.
No. What I need is the data. Will you share your data?
I am not sure that will be possible.
But your work is in PubMed Central and was funded by NIH.
That is true.
And it was published in Science, which requires that you share your data.
I did publish in Science.
Then I am requesting your data. Can I have a copy of your data?
I am not sure where my data is.
But surely you saved your data.
I did. I saved it on a USB drive.
Where is the USB drive?
It is in a box. It is in a box at home. I just moved.
But can I use your data?
There are many boxes. So many boxes. I forgot to label the boxes.
Hello again. Thank you for sending me a copy of your data on a USB drive. I received the envelope yesterday.
You are welcome, but I will need that back when you are finished. That is my only copy.
I did have a question.
What is your question? You might find the answer in my article.
No. I received the data, but when I opened it up, it was in hexadecimal.
Yes, that is right.
I cannot read hexadecimal.
You asked for my data and I gave it to you. I have done what you asked.
But is there a way to read the hexadecimal?
You will need the program that created the hexadecimal file.
Yes, I will. What is the name of the program?
Cytosynth.
I do not know this program.
It was a very good program. The company that made the program went bankrupt in 2007.
Do you have a copy of the program?
I do not use this program anymore because the company that made it went bankrupt. Maybe you can buy a copy on eBay.
I have good news.
You again.
I talked to my colleague. She knew a person with a copy of the software.
Then why do you need me? Everything you need to know about the data is in the article.
I opened the data and I could not understand it.
If you have the program, you will find it is clear.
Well, I noticed that you called your data fields SAM. Is that an abbreviation?
Yes, it is an abbreviation of my co-author's name. His name is Samuel Lee. We call them SAM.
I see. And what is the content of the field called SAM1?
Ah yes, SAM1 is the level of CXCR4 expression.
And what is the content of the field called SAM2?
That is logical if you think about it.
What is the content of the field called SAM2?
I don't remember.
What about SAM3? Is there a guide to the data anywhere?
Yes, of course. It is the article that is published in Science.
The article does not tell me what the field names mean. Is there any record of what these field names mean?
Yes. My co-author knows what the content of SAM2 is, and SAM3. And SAM4.
Can I talk to your co-author?
I'm not sure.
I would very much like to talk to your co-author.
Well, he was a graduate student. He went back to China 2 years ago.
Can I have his contact information?
He is in China. His name is Sam Lee.
I think I cannot use your data.
You could check the article to see if what you need is there.
Please stop talking now.
So back again, what would you think about this example of researchers? Okay, I can summarize the issues in that video. Dr. Judy Benign is an oncologist, and she found a paper that is published on BM Central, published in Science Journal. And then she went to the author and asked him for the original data. And you see all these errors that happened. He didn't have any plan to share data. He didn't manage the data at any stage. So what would you think about these issues?
Hello. Hello.
Hello, hello, Junia.
Zynab.
Sorry, Zynab.
Yeah. Good. Or Zynab, in short. Yes. Well, I think the data, to me, does not seem to be reliable. That's why he does not want to share it.
Excuse me, Zynab, could you say it again, please?
To me, I don't think the data is reliable. That's why he does not want to share it.
He didn't have any data to share.
He has the data. He has the data, but I don't think it was reliable for him to share.
It wasn't reliable for him to share.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, this is why he is trying to play otherwise, not to share the information, because it was not. I don't think it was properly done. The data management was properly done, and I don't think also it's that much reliable to share.
Okay, so what other thoughts? Thank you, Zynab. So, do you think?
I have been told. Okay.
Okay, Dua is speaking.
Sausan.
Dr. Sausan, yes. Go on, Dr. Sausan.
Yeah. I was told that every paper that you read, it has to be able to be repeatable. So when you're using it with the same condition and everything, you can be able to repeat everything in the paper and have the same exact results. So if there is something ambiguous about the data or the information in the paper, I think it doesn't really give its purpose to be published, even if it's published in Science or Nature. Sometimes when we're doing the genetic bioinformatic work, they ask us before we submit in the NCBI, not only the chromatograms, but just the raw sequence, so they can make sure that we did it right and we have legit information. And after that, when we publish, they can share it with anybody else, because you give the right then to the journal that published the data. So that's my thought.
Dr. Salsa, you think the journal has the right to ask for the data, you mean?
The journal usually sometimes ask for some data to make sure that it's legit, it's not stolen or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yes, I see. So what if another author or another colleague asked you for your data?
I will give it to them after it's published, and I will share with them the code for everything, like SAM 1 and SAM 2 and SAM 3 and SAM 4. Because, you know, if I can share something like this now, and this person is intrigued to see my work and even replicate it or do something, do it with another protocol or something, maybe it's a future cooperation between us. Why should I refuse that? But if he has a very, very good, what they call it, reputation. If it's well respected and has a good reputation in the scientific field, never had any of his students commit plagiarism or misconduct or anything like that, because then it's going to be so fishy.
How you can gather these issues? Like, I'm not sure how you can find that one author is reputable than another.
Yeah, it's really hard, but when you keep digging in and you cooperate with people, you can figure out who's legit and who's not. So who's worthy of sharing your data with? It's not gonna like falsify it and use it for his own benefit, and you know.
Yes, I see.
What do you mean by his or her own benefit?
Like he can misuse the data. Like he can take the data and, you know, make some changes in it and use it with different protocol or something, and try to fabricate some other things and make it his own research.
Well, but I mean, if someone published a paper from your data, I mean, you could easily figure out whether he or she has falsified it.
Totally, if I know that he published, if I keep record of everything, like sometimes we working in a center, in a genetic engineering center, so all of us working on the same thing, but different organism or something. So sometimes you can publish and nobody else see the publication. It's not like, you know, like in the States, for example, like when you, every year you have an ABS meeting, for example, and you present all your student data and everything open, it's in the conference, you know, it's open. It's open for sharing and discussing and collaboration. But actually in my college, sometimes they hide things because they are afraid somebody else is gonna steal from them. So you really have no idea who's else working on the same work you're working on or the same project, you know?
So, but how do you know then who to share the data with? You published your paper already. What is the purpose of sharing the data?
There is multiple things. First, so we can have collaboration when we're working in the same field. Second, maybe the one that I'm sharing the data with can point me out my defaults or my you know, like my weakness or my strength. So it's a networking thing. It's a networking.
Well, I mean, they could also see if you analyze the data correctly, right?
Totally. And sometimes they suggest some other way of analyzing the data from other point of view, so they can have another, you know, paper published with different meanings from the same samples or data.
So now you were saying your institution hides the data? I'm not understanding that.
No, I didn't say institution. I meant some of the people that you're working with is the same field. Sometimes they don't want to share that they published even. Like, you know, when somebody get promoted, you'll be surprised that they got promoted. You didn't see all the work that they have. But for me, for example, when I publish paper, I'm just like, you know, I'm throwing celebration. I published a paper, guys, you should see it. And I send copies to everybody, and I'm really happy showing the data to everybody and showing
why are some people hiding their data?
I think for the same reason that we have the one on the video. Maybe because the data is not legit. Maybe it has falsification. Maybe it has default.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
So people may hide their data because they're concerned that they have done something wrong with the data, taken out outliers, blah, blah, blah. Do you think there should be a uniform policy for people in order to get their paper published that they need to guarantee that they will share the data in order to get published?
I think I'm not sure about that, but I'm not
Well,
sure
no,
that you can force somebody.
I'm asking your opinion.
Oh, okay. I would love to do that, but it has to be very, very
What do you mean
information.
restricted?
I mean, like, for example, it's the same like the plagiarism. Like, you can do paraphrasing, you can do index citation, you can do a lot of things. So if you're going to share the data, you make sure that you're going to, cite the people that you share, that you had the data acquired from them. You have to use it properly. Don't abuse it. Like a lot of regulation. I mean, like it's like a protocol. It should
Okay,
be.
So you could have a data transfer agreement. Actually, we talked about that in another meeting. But there's a lot of fraudulent publications with misuse of data, fabrication, falsification, and one of the ways to prevent that is to require authors they're allowing to share the data. And for sure, somebody else could take the data and not give you proper attribution, but that could be handled with a data transfer agreement. But I mean, just recently, I think in the Lancet and the New England Journal, they published 2 papers about COVID, and it had to be retracted because the data were unreliable. I mean, there's just so many papers with falsification and fabrication of data that one of the ways to combat that is to have authors' willingness to share the data. And I don't want to belabor the point, but I know in the last year or two, when I have published papers, the editor asked, what mechanisms do I have to share the data? And there are public sites in which you could dump your data and share that. You don't have to do that, but you have to tell the editor what data sharing mechanisms will you have to make the data publicly available. And one major reason is for people to be able to see how you analyze the data. Anyway, I just want to
not be some sort of duplication.
I'm sorry?
And this will not be considered as a duplication of data.
What do you mean?
Okay, like sometimes sharing data result in like duplication. I will work on data by that way, and another colleague will work on the data by that way, or that sort of analysis. And the revealed results will be 2 types of results that similar to each others. If we are going to publish both results, then this will be some sort of duplication.
I'm not sure if I understand.
Okay, let's discuss the issue of reproducibility and replication of data. Sometimes when we are going to publish our data, we should distinguish between reproducibility and replication. If I'm going to work on the data that way and I will find these findings, let's say it a finding, and other author will or other researcher will work on the data by another way, and he will find another results. If these two results are different from each other, then this couldn't be called a duplication.
Could be what? Publication?
Duplication.
Duplication.
Duplication. Like we are going to publish the same results 2 times.
But it's another investigator team.
Yes, it's another investigator team.
Well, I mean, if they analyze it differently, I mean, I think that I think before another group of investigators publish a different analysis, I think that should be discussed with the original authors.
Exactly, to avoid duplication of data.
Well, yeah, and confusion, and the journal editor needs to know that. I mean, it's all about transparency.
It's about transparency.
Right. Yes. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. So here's the regular data cycle that at the first we create the data, then we will work on this data, processing of the data, analysis of the data, and then preserving data or storing data for maybe for future work or for reuse. Then I can get access of my data to other colleagues in the field to reuse it in another way or use it in their work and so on. This is the regular cycle of data. So what questions to be asked to foster data integrity from the start? I should, from the start, we should know how will the data will be collected, and how the records will be kept and stored, at which place we can keep these records. Okay, also how can we will back up the data, like the example in the previous video. You saw that the company bankrupt suddenly, and they lost the software and they couldn't back up the data. So we should plan from the start how we will be able to back up the data again. For how long should data be kept? Some funders may ask data to be kept for 3 years, for 5 years, or whatever they asked for. Also, who owns the data? The institution, the supervisors, most senior author, or if there will be multiple owners of the data. All of these issues should be pre-planned before starting the project. Also, and of course, how we will share the data. And the policies that we will adhere to, maybe an institutional policy, journal policy, maybe an international policy, but that also should be clear from the start. Here is another case study. It is a very simple case study, but it also encounters some problems that happen when there is no pre-planned data management plan. This is the case study, so I put it on one slide. We can read it together, and you can use the annotate tab to highlight the issues that you think it is a problem or it is an issue in this case study. Maybe somebody wanted to read it.
Well, Zynab, why don't you read it?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, other people will be busy annotating.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Bernard Sears is the principal investigator of a grant from the National Institute of Health. And the primary aim of the research is the chemical modification of specific natural products for use as anti-cancer agents. Part of this research involved phase 1 clinical trial in humans, testing these chemically modified derivatives for toxicity. During the fourth year of this 5-year grant, Dr. Sears developed health problems and is diagnosed as being terminally ill. During the first several months of his illness, he is able to work from his home office, not from his lab. He has his research technician bring all the relevant data books from the chemical synthesis phase of the research to his home. Then he begins analyzing and organizing the data with the intention of preparing a manuscript for publication. When Dr. Sears becomes too ill to work, the institution contacts the NIH and requests appointment of an interim principal investigator. NIH approves of this request. The phase 1 clinical trial moved ahead smoothly during the last year of the proposal, and the results are promising. But unfortunately, before the grant funding period ends, Dr. Sears dies. The financial book on the grant are closed at the end of the 5-year funding period, no more funding, and a final financial report is filed with the NIH several months later. During this time, Dr. Sears' household has been liquidated and his assets assumed into an estate. The NIH sent a request for a final scientific report on the project. The director of a sponsored program gives this request to the interim principal investigator, and after several weeks of investigation, no information can be gained on the location of the data book that Dr. Sears took home with him in order to write his manuscript. Following an investigation by the university legal office and the campus police, we should find the last line. So, following an investigation by the University Legal Office and the campus police, it is concluded that the data book were destroyed when Dr. Sears' household was sold. يعني أول ما البيت اتباع خلاص كده we lost the data. So, would you like to highlight the issues in this case study?
Could you put that in the Word document?
Yes, I can. Here it is on a chat. Okay, and I will send you on another file.
Right, and just make it full view.
So all of you see the Word document? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So here it is. So what are the pitfalls in this story?
I think there was mainly no data plan, and specifically, there was no backup of the data.
That's exactly true. There is no plan from the start, and at the end, they weren't able to back up the data. Here is another issue also. Like the owner of the data is Dr. Sears or his colleague.
Yeah, I needed to ask about that. Where is his teamwork? The one that they were doing the work. Where is their lab notebooks? Where is the recording of the results?
Yes, Dr. Sasan, you are raising a very important issue. There is an issue with the data got documented on this issue, but the transportation process was an issue. Like they transport the data from the lab office to the home office without documenting that. So it is not only just an issue about documentation. It's also about storage of the data, how data will be kept, how data will be recorded, how data will be stored. So in the notebooks, they should put every minor issue about the data. Like on date 17th July, the data have been transported from the office to the home, and now the data is under supervision of Dr. Sears, and the backup of Dr. Sears is Dr. X, Z, and so on. Like the data should be it should be very, very clear image about where's the data, how can we store the data, how can we pick up the data, and so on. Any other issue in that case?
Maybe there is issue about the security of data, because the data may contain some private or confidential information.
Exactly. Also, here the confidentiality of the data aren't clear. Like the data is transport, but how can we be sure that the data will be secure? Thank you, Dr. Said, for raising this point. Any other issues?
Shouldn't the NIH have a principal investigator like a PI and a co-PI? Shouldn't everybody be involved? I just cannot get that everybody has to deliver everything to one person and he's the only one that do that. The responsibility has to be divided between the people that working in a team, right? Like somebody is responsible for writing reports, somebody is responsible for preparing manuscript, somebody responsible for the lab work, and so on, right? Am I right?
Exactly, Dr. Towson. The issue, I don't think there's something truly right or truly wrong on the issue of data management, but if you plan from the start what will happen, who will own the data, who is the first owner of the data, who is the second owner of the data, and so on, I think we can put preliminary solutions for all these issues. So any other issues with this case? Okay, let's go back to the presentation. The advantage of sharing data, as Dr. Sosa and Dr. Hare discussed together, is that sharing data reinforces open scientific inquiry. It also supports the
would you
Your
please?
screen is not shared.
Yeah, would you please share your presentation?
Thank you very much. Now you can see my presentation slides. Advantage of
Yes.
Okay. So as Dr. Sausa and Dr. Hare discussed the importance of sharing data, that sharing data reinforces open scientific inquiry and collaboration. It also supports the verification and replication of another of original results, not duplication. Also sharing data encourage collaboration and multiple perspectives, like what Dr. Sausa mentioned. It also reduces costs by avoiding duplicate data collection efforts. And also sharing data protect against faulty and fraudulent data. The issue of transparency or the issue of visibility, sharing data enhances the visibility and transparency of data gained. Also, sharing data preserves data for future use. And sharing data also helps the broader community and individuals, researchers do better research, the issue of collaboration. But we couldn't ignore the challenges of sharing data, the time and the effort to make data shareable. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort to plan for that issues. Also perceived risk that a company losing control of the data, like what Dr. Said said, that we should pay attention for how the data will be controlled in order not to breach the confidentiality of the data. Also, and specifically, if there is a sensitive or information issues in the data set, more attention should be paid. Also, the unclear or problematic ownership of the data, especially if the data have a patent like the first videos. Sharing data may be challengeable at the time. Lack of incentives for sharing data. What I'd like also to highlight is the record keeping. Like for every single research, we should have a lab notebook. Not necessarily that you are working on a lab to have a lab notebook, but for every single research, you should have a notebook. Even you are doing a survey, even you are doing something that is didn't require experiments at all. So this record, you can register the data, the investigators, what was done, what will be done in the future, where corresponding research products can be found. You can register and document every single thing in that record. So lab notebook shouldn't be supplemented as needed by the specialized methods of record keeping, such as computer files, tapes, and gels, and so on. Who should keep the records? Maybe the principal investigator, maybe other person who have the responsibility of keeping the records. Also, if regulations or other consideration preclude the researcher taking copies, then the BI has a responsibility to make this clear to the research group before work begins to avoid any sort of conflict among the research team. Usually transparency and visibility is a golden solution for everything. If everything is clear from the start and it is transparent from the start, then everything will go smoothly. Also, we should balance between sharing data and security, and this is an issue I'd like to discuss with you in detail within a few slides. How long records should be kept? The National Science Foundation, for example, asked the authors to keep researcher for 3 years. And I think NIH asked authors to keep records for 5 years. So researchers should be aware from the start about that issue in order not to be in trouble with the funding agency at the end. Here is some of the ethical consideration when data is sharing. Number one is privacy and confidentiality. When data are being shared and data sets can be merged, such that the sharing may generate information that allows people to be identified. What is your thoughts about that issues? Could data sharing lead to breach of confidentiality?
I think Dr. Henry, sorry. I think like Dr. Henry said that it has to be like a data transfer agreement like a protocol between the people that we're sharing our data with, so it can help us keep our copyright.
Dr. Sousan, your sound is a little bit unclear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please, go on.
Yeah, Dr. Henry mentioned something about data transfer agreement that can be signed between the two parts, or the two parties are sharing the information together. So they are legally binded by this agreement. So it can protect our privacy and confidentiality, and at the same time our copyright.
Our copyright. Okay, Dr. Sousan. So, Dr. Sousan, about the sharing data, would you think that I have the right, as a researcher, I have the right to share the data of my participant or my patients with colleagues from other institutions without permission from the participants from the start?
No, I think this is like the same thing when you're doing, when you take informed consent from patient to do some research on specific title. If you have some leftover samples, you have to take another informed consent from the patient that you're gonna do another research. The same applies here. If I'm gonna share it with somebody else, I have to have informed consent from the patient that they agreeing that I should share their information, because if I didn't do this, I am violating their human rights and civil rights, and their confidentiality, of course, and privacy. So I have to have informed consent from the patient that I'm sharing this information with another colleague for another purpose of using this. Because sometimes it's going to end up asking me, you can share your data, can you share your samples too? Can I use your sample from these patients to work on another project?
Are you talking about samples or data now?
And in the beginning, I was talking about the data, but if I share the data with somebody else, I have to take an informed consent from the participant of the result of the data or the experiment, that I'm going to share it with another researcher or another institution. But if it gets interesting for the other participant that he want to use my samples, I still have to have another informed consent to give him part of my samples to use.
What happens if the data are de-identified?
What do you mean? Excuse me, what do you mean?
De-identified.
Anonymous data, maybe, or de-identified data.
How do you work with unidentified data? What do you mean by that? I'm sorry.
Like we will going to share the de-identified data, Dr. Sousan. Like we will remove all identifiers, and then we will share data with the other institution or with the third party without identifiers. Would you think that this is something that can violate the autonomy of persons, or is something that compromises the information?
Yeah, totally. I cannot do that. I don't have the right to do that. That's violation of the right. Even if I remove everything, I'm still sharing their data. That's considered unethical.
Well, if you can't identify them, what? I mean, what's the basis of their rights? If you can't identify who they are, I mean, what gives here? The journal is asking you to share the data for good research purposes, and if the data are de-identified, what right are we talking about here? You can't identify them.
This is the same. If you're asking this question, it's the same like when the video he has SAM1 and SAM2 and SAM3. It's still violation. They're gonna use the same data I used from these patient or these participants, even if they are unidentified. They are using part of their.
Okay. What do other people think about?
I think it's fine if it is de-identified. I don't need an extra informed consent. They have already agreed to participate in research. So participation in research wouldn't matter anything for the participant.
Other thoughts?
So this depends on the degree of identification. I should de-identify the data well, not just the name.
It's de-identified.
Yeah, de-identified.
Okay.
So this should not be restricted to the name, because there are people can
de-identify. I agree with you. De-identifying the data has to do more than deleting the names. So the data set is de-identified. You cannot identify who the participants are. So what do you think about data sharing, informed consent, blah, blah, blah?
I think there is no problem if the data will be used for good reason.
Good reason. Okay. What other reason are there? Let's assume it's for good reasons. It's not going to build a bomb. Okay. All right. Other thoughts? I think that makes sense. I mean, I talked previously about non-human subject research. If the data are de-identified, then no reason for informed consent. You could state in the original informed consent form that the data will be available to members of the research team, and it may be shared with other investigators, in which case the data will be de-identified. It's just like saying when you publish in manuscripts, no names or identity will be possible, right? I mean, isn't it the same thing as publishing in a manuscript? You have to tell the participants in the original informed consent form with whom do you plan to share the data with. So I think it's since now there is this requirement to share data with other people, add a separate line to the informed consent form saying that data will be published in de-identified form and may also be shared with other investigators in de-identified form as well. And then, that should take care, it should take care of those issues, I think.
Thank you, Professor Henry. Also, the issues of the same, like sharing data with foreign institutions or international institution, maybe should be declared from the start in the informed consent to give the participants the full range of autonomy to decide whether to be involved in such research or not. Especially some research, we didn't know what is the future of or what is the type of the future research that could be applied on certain data. Sometimes we take data and then we store it maybe on biobank or whatever, and maybe after years would like to work on this data again. And this type of work weren't clear from the start, or the nature of this work weren't clear from the start. So I think that all these issues should be covered on the informed consent from the start, and the researcher should decide from the start whether he will go to take a broad consent from the participant or a specific consent. So all these issues should be pre-planned from the start. Also, these issues give some sort of public trust on the research agencies and on the researchers in general. Dr. Henry, I think that I ended my presentation. I just have a data management plan checklist that I'd like to share with my colleagues here to see.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure. Go on, Dr. Amaha.
So I want to ask if one of my colleagues asked for my data because he's going to repeat some work I did on certain cohort of patients, but he doesn't have enough patients, so he would like to get my patients and to get other new patients, and had to have like more number of patients. So is this ethical to ask to share my data with him? You get my point?
Yes, I get your point, Dr. Maha. I'm just thinking about the scientific validity of the points. Like he will merge two sets of data together, right?
Yeah.
And this is scientifically valid. That will not invade the.
It will just be like a repetition of my work on a larger cohort.
Repetition of the work.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Henry, could you help us with this issue?
So the investigator just wants to have your data to add to his or her new study to have a higher sample size?
Yes.
Well, I agree with Zynab. I think that brings up a lot of issues about scientific validity and I mean, it's I mean, it just sounds like it just brings up a lot of issues about whether the data will be similar in terms of collection from the same recruitment samples, sites, or I mean, it's collected at different periods of time.
So
can I add something, Dr. Henry?
Period, but it's in the same place with the same inclusion and exclusion criteria, or mainly
what do you mean by the
criteria.
same place?
Can I add something?
Wait. Hi, Tama. Thanks for joining. I just want to understand this one last point. What do you mean by the same place?
I mean the same institution? Hospital. Yeah, same hospital or institution, same inclusion
but it's not
criteria.
The same time period.
No, it's not.
Okay. Tama, what are your thoughts?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Actually, I faced a similar condition like this 2 years ago. I was conducting a study on urban area in Beni Suef. And another group of colleagues are conducting the similar study on rural areas in Beni Suef. And both of us got ethical approval on their studies. And then the main investigators, me and the principal investigators of the other study, decided together to merge our data and to have a bigger study containing urban and rural data on hepatitis C in Beni Suef governorate. Actually, we did it depending on having ethical approval and consent from all participants in all the two studies, and we produced a new study having the data of these two combined studies. is it answer your question?
So it's not the same situation because they are like not two cohorts of the patients. You have two cohorts, one in the rural area and one in the urban area. But this will be the same cohort with the same inclusion criteria. So
it's actually, Dr. Maha, if the data are, both of them are collected from urban areas, but I collected a group of data and my colleagues collected another group of data for another cohort, and we decided to merge our data together in order to have a bigger sample. Provided that we got already ethical approval on both studies, I think from my point of view, it could be accepted.
So let me say it in another word. This colleague has sample size, it should be reaching 50 patients, okay? And he is expecting to collect like 20 or 25 patients, and I have that another 25. We should share our samples together, right?
What about authorship?
I would be included in the research. I am included. So the main issue is that
you have ethical approval on his study, and he has ethical approval on his study.
Yes. But the idea that's Go ahead.
Ethically, from my point of view, it can be accepted.
Okay.
But
even
what you can
it was not like clearly stated in the protocol that this will include retro and prospective data. It's okay.
You may send a protocol amendment to the ethics committee, got a new ethical approval on your new study, for example. And if the ethics committee approve this, so go on and what's wrong in this? This is my opinion. That's it. And we can hear about from other colleagues, what do they say?
For sure, the devil is in the details of every situation.
Yes, that's right.
Again, I think you bring up a good point in the sense that, as I also mentioned before, if the data were collected during two different time periods that are substantially different, I'd be concerned about combining prospective and retrospective data. Of course, then you could always do what am I thinking of, where you do analysis of 20 different retrospective studies. You know what I mean. I just can't think of the term. I mean, people are always analyzing many different smaller studies.
Meta-analysis?
Yes,
analysis, you mean?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, people are always doing that. You're taking a lot of smaller studies. And now you're doing a meta-analysis. So I think that's probably similar to what you're saying. So as long as one is transparent in the methods of the recruitment analysis, blah, 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 you know, then you send it to a journal and you let the reviewers decide, okay? So I think that should be the final answer. But good point. Good point. I mean, if the data were, I think Tamara was mentioning, I got the sense that the data were collected at a similar time. I guess my question is, if both studies were coming from the same institution, I'm just wondering why the institution didn't recommend for the investigators to get together and do one study. One time, I was doing a study on septic shock that was being funded by a drug company. And then there was this investigator in another intensive care unit in a hospital who wanted to do the same study on his patients in the intensive care unit from the same drug company. And at that time, it was the drug company who was wondering why two different studies were being done in two different units, and the drug companies wanted us to collaborate together on the same study. So a similar situation. So anyway, yet another issue about collaboration. I think it's more about collaboration than data sharing. Okay, good. So what do you have here? Checklist for a data management plan. Okay, that looks good. You want to walk us through that?
Yes, this is a data management plan checklist from Edinburgh, an institution in Edinburgh. I'd like also just to share it as an example of a data management plan. Here's the checklist request all these informations to be clear from the start, from the authors, administrative data like the funders, the grant reference numbers, the project name, the project description, and so on. Also, it requires information about the data collection, what is the type, format, and volume of data that will be used, software that will be used, if there is any existing data that can be reused, okay? Data about the structure and name of the folders and files that will be stored, okay? Also, data about the documentation and the metadata like information. I remove it by the highlighter. Information is needed for the data to be read and interrupted in the future. If other researchers asked us to reuse this data, how can I will share it and in which format, and how can I will ease the process of sharing. As Professor Tamer and Professor Henry said and Dr. Maha said, that sharing data for collaboration to ease the process of the scientific research, not to put restrictions, but we should balance between issues in data sharing, whether data sharing will help in the process of research or it may invade the copyright or the intellectual property. So it is some sort of, we are balancing it in our mind. Also, it requires the data, its title, the date of creation, and under what conditions it can be accessed. All these issues should be clear from the start. Also, the ethical and legal compliance, the consent process, how consent will be gained, what is the items and the consent, how the consent will cover the autonomy of the participants, and all these issues. We can note that this is a very long checklist to consider before starting. The storage and backup, how can we will store, under which conditions we will back up, from where we will back up, okay? The selection and preservation of data, how we will store it, and how we will keep the confidentiality and the privacy. The data sharing also. How will potential users find out about your data? With whom will you share the data, and under which conditions? Will you share data via a repository, handle request directly, or use another mechanism? All these fine details and a lot of details, and this is one of the challenges of sharing data. It consumes time and it need more effort and need more planning. So I just wanted to share with you this example as an example of data management plans that we should consider before start our projects to protect ourselves, to protect the scientific integrity of the research, and so on. I'd like to thank you all for your time and your listening, and I welcome your thoughts and welcome our professor's thoughts who are joining us, Professor Henry and Professor Tamer. With Dr. Henry, I finished.
So, very important issue about data responsibility. I just want to give another example of issues in data sharing, especially in social behavioral research. I've been doing a study, a focus group study involving nurses about their issues, perspectives of taking care of patients with COVID-19, investigating issues about moral distress. And so they would share their stories about how issues about taking care of sick patients, and also other stories about, the organization had to do a lot of different things with the nursing teams, and a lot of issues about differential pay, hazard pay, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm trying to say, so there were two issues involved with that. When word got out that I was doing this study, I got an email from the leadership of the organization, from nursing, and they wanted to know if I would have as collaborators two of their nurses who do research in the organization, assessing various studies in the institutions, and they wanted to know if I would have them as collaborators. And I spoke with them, and I said, this would be fine. It's good to have nurses as collaborators, but I was concerned about them sharing the data that they would get from the participants with the hospital leadership. So I developed a one-page confidentiality document in which I had them read and sign that essentially in no shape or form would they share any data with anybody outside of the research team, including hospital leadership. I made that very, very explicit, and they signed it. And I said the results, even in de-identified form, could not be discussed with hospital leadership until after the paper was published, because I didn't want to have leadership coming down my back, complaining about the data and how it may or may not affect the organization. So I had this confidentiality agreement that they signed without any issues. Then I had this other issue. After the study was done, I asked the participants to do a short survey. I was doing these discussions on Zoom, focus group discussions on Zoom rather than face-to-face. And so I wanted their opinions about how well they thought they were able to share their experiences on Zoom rather than face-to-face. And so about 3/4 of them completed the survey. It was optional, and they also listed some text comments. And one of them said, well, this was, I'm glad I participated, but I'm concerned that maybe some of my responses, my nurse manager may find out that I made these statements about my experience on the unit, so I'm concerned about how de-identifiable my data are. So what would you do to allay that concern? The participants are concerned now that maybe their responses may not be identifiable. Just like El Said said, even though there's no names, they're talking about their experiences in the hospital, and they're concerned that if they were talking about a certain patient, then their nurse manager may be able to figure out who said it. So what would you do to allay that concern?
Can we don't write the name of the hospital?
Can you what?
Like, don't write the name of the hospital?
Well, that's a good thought. Though it still might be able to be de-identifiable if the context was so specific to the extent that people will say, "Oh, that sounds like a patient we had in the unit, and this nurse was taking care of this patient, so it was probably this nurse talking about this patient."
Can you not mention all the details?
Well, one could try to do that, but sometimes it's the details that makes the responses important.
I'm not sure, but we can make some changes in the data in a matter that will not affect the interpretation of the results.
Okay, but I get scared when I start changing the data around. Okay, so
maybe collaborate with other researchers from another institution who is working on or who is doing the same focus group and merge two data together so that you can identify.
That sounds a little messy. So actually, what I did was that right before I sent the manuscript to a journal, all the quotations I used in the manuscript, okay, I sent it to all the participants. And I told them, these are the quotations that I have included in the manuscript. Please let me know if you could, one, recognize your quotations, and if you could, if you have any concerns that these quotations could identify you as a participant. So I sent it to all the participants, and no one came back and said, you know, eliminate this quote or something like that. But I figured that they would be the final judge of whether they thought a quote could identify them. And actually, I wrote that in the manuscript, you know, on the ethics portion of the methods section, that, you know, to enhance confidentiality, I sent the responses to the participants and let them have the final say.
This is a very wise solution.
Well, I wanted them to feel safe.
Sure.
About their responses. And in fact, I remember one of the responses, during the discussion, they were really talking about intimate details of their experiences. And one of them said, well, I have a few things to say about the organization, if this is indeed a safe place to reveal it. And I said, yes, I told you right from the beginning that all your responses will be held in strict confidence. And this was, you know, obviously a very sensitive topic for, I mean, a lot of nurses had some issues. They wanted to talk about the organization, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them had good things to say. So it was a mixed bag. So yeah, how to handle the data is very important. Let me ask one final question. So let's say participants have, you know, contributed their health data rather either in clinical trials or social behavioral research, and after a few months, let's say they say, well, please withdraw my specimens from any future research, as well as my data. And then they also say, please also strip my data from any analysis that have already been done on my data. What do you think about that? Well, if the data has not been analyzed yet, or if the specimens are still existing, they have a right to withdraw the specimens. But what about the data that has already been analyzed?
So when he did sign an informed consent in the beginning of the experiments, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, informed consent.
Yeah, but I think it stated in the informed consent that he can forfeit any time.
That they could what?
forfeit, like, you know, like withdraw from the research
Right,
at any
withdraw
time.
from the research.
At any time he wants, but I don't recall that we had in the informed consent session that it said after doing the data analysis, like he was already involved in it. Even though if he asked to withdraw, that's going to mess up all the data analysis. It's going to be like missing sample, right?
Right.
So I don't think he has the right to do that if he's not involved in the experiment already. If he want to do any future aspects of the experiment coming after that, it's okay, because he had to sign another informed consent for every experiment that he's going to go through again. But for the one that already has collected data and analyzed data, it's already done, right? Or what do you think?
Yeah, it's already been done. Are we not respecting the patient's right to keep, if they want to have it withdrawn?
Is there anything in the informed consent say that he can withdraw after the data collected and analyzed?
No, there's nothing in the informed consent form.
I'm not sure this will be violating of his rights, because he agreed from the beginning on it, right?
I'm sorry?
I think it's not violating of his right because he agreed in the beginning to have this experiment, right?
Right. What do other people think?
True.
I think
he has the right to withdraw at any time.
I'm sorry?
He has the right to withdraw at any time. So if the data is not published, I would remove him from the data analyzed and to repeat the analysis.
Repeat the analysis.
If it is not published, if it's not already published.
If it's not published.
Yeah.
But Dr. Ma, sometimes the analysis take a lot of efforts and a lot of time. Like repeating the analysis.
But it's his own right to withdraw at any time. What do we mean by at any time?
Well, yeah, what do we mean by any time?
Any time.
Is it his right?
Okay, I have a
yeah,
suggestion.
I think it's his right, yeah.
Other thoughts?
I don't know. I think the stage of analyzing the data is de-identified. Patients are de-identified, so I don't know.
Can I have a suggestion?
Sure.
So why can we add this in the informed consent? And instead of saying any time, it can state it specifically the start of the experiment, by the end of the experiment, or collecting the data, analyzing the data. He cannot forfeit or withdraw after analyzing the data, even before the publication, because as Dr. Zynab said, it takes a lot of effort, and if you're doing statistical analysis, and if you have a large sample size, that's tons of hassle. And having a missing sample, it's like you're doing the whole thing from the beginning again. So why can't we add this in the protocol or in the informed consent? You can withdraw anytime before analyzing the data, not after.
What if we didn't do this? Is it his right or not?
We add it first, and after that we can discuss that.
What's that?
What if we didn't do what Dr. Selson suggested is to write down that it's not your right to withdraw after analysis of the data, and it would be de-identified. Okay, I agree, but what if we stated in the protocol, you can withdraw at any time? We didn't add that it's like before analysis or after analysis of the data.
I think the experiment stated in the informed consent is the stage of data collection. It's not including data analysis. The experiment mean data collection and managing the samples, for example, or anything, but it doesn't include analyzing the data statistically.
That's great. That's mean he doesn't have the right then.
Yeah.
Well, what are you balancing that right against? Doing ethical analysis really involves balancing different values. So, what are you balancing that proposed right to have the data withdrawn against what? What is the counter? What is the counter value? What are the opposing values that one would refer to make a decision? We're talking about how would you analyze this situation?
Or the opposing here, I guess, is the right of patient to withdraw and the difficulty of repetition of the analysis of the data.
And I'm sorry, the what?
The opposing factors here are the right of the patient to withdraw and the difficulty of repetition of the data analysis.
Well, it's I might phrase the opposing value maybe a little bit differently. I mean, I would take it one step further from the burden of reanalysis. What other thoughts? I mean, that would be a good first thought.
I'm thinking maybe the opposing value would be meeting your required sample. Because if you move the data for that individual, then
I'm sorry.
I mean meeting your required meeting your required sample size that you really intended. Because if you remove the data for that individual, you have one sample less from probably what your sample size, the sample size intended.
And that would affect what?
That might affect your findings at the end, your results.
Okay, right. I mean, what we're dealing with is scientific validity here.
Yes.
It may make, as you said, your conclusions less valid. Also, if that happens, think about this. What about all the other participants who participated in the study, and now, I mean, they participated in the study because partly, hopefully, they wanted to advance science and be a part of research, and now because a few people, for whatever reason, wants to have their data withdrawn, now you're frustrating the other participants in their efforts for their contributions. So, so on one side, you have a right of a patient, and then on the other side, you have scientific validity and the rights of the other participants. And so one could also claim that the right to have your data withdrawn, someone could say that's a right, but now we have to start thinking about how important is that right? I mean, every right have different degrees of importance. And one could also say, is that really a fundamental life, like freedom of the speech, and other freedoms, a right to vote, all those other important rights that is fundamental to life. So one could start thinking about how important is that right. But again, ethical analysis, we're always balancing values here, and assigning different weights to each of the opposing values. And so think about that when we start continue to do with our ethical analysis. Okay, good. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, can I ask something?
Yes.
So let's say the participant came to me and said, I want to withdraw from the study after I finish analyzing the data. Can I talk him out of it?
Talk him out of it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could talk him out of it. You could buy him dinner, or you could just say no. Sorry, and explain why you're saying no.
I think I should hear him why he's saying no first. Like why he's wanna withdraw.
Whatever you need to do to persuade him. However, at the end of the day, you may have to simply say no. And
can he sue me for that?
Anybody could sue you for anything.
Oh my God.
Okay? So if you're going to live your life with a concern about being sued, you might as well pack it in now. Okay? Go off to the desert island and have a good life.
Do we still have time to raise another question?
Sure.
In a study, it was a multinational study with several principal investigators. We were conducting a study about patient rights and the patient's opinion regarding the rights in participating in researches. And we collected data from several countries, and we presented the data in conferences, in a big conference in the United States. And after a while, one of the investigators from one country decided that she did not like the way of analysis, and she requested from the other investigators to withdraw the data of the whole country. And then we faced a problem in this case, as we already present our data in a conference, and this investigator is requesting to withdraw the data of the whole country.
Tom, are you talking about the study we did?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. We sent our study to a journal, which a very reputable journal, and then we sent to the editor of the journal that we have this conflict with one of our investigators. What do you see? Is this the rights of the investigator or the PI to ask to withdraw the data of a patient who already consented to participate in the study? And shall we agree to remove the data of this country from our study or not? And here comes the question, the ownership of the data. Is it owned to the investigator, or owned by the participant, or owned by the organization, or owned by the country? What do you see?
What were her reasons? Like, what is the justification of that act?
She didn't like the way of analysis, and she said that I didn't accept, and she didn't want even to communicate and continue discussing what is the problem. Just I want to withdraw my data, and that's it.
Well, originally the investigator was concerned about how the data was reflecting her country. And I said, okay, we'll combine all the data from all the different countries into one data set. So this way, nobody will know which data came from which country. Okay?
My question, is it the right of the investigator to ask to withdraw the data of the country after being having the consent of the patients?
I don't think it's her right. After reaching this stage of the research, we should not accept or reject to participate according to the results. We accept the idea.
What do you think? What could be the best solution to this this situation? What shall we do as other co-investigator and in this regarding this situation?
Maybe talking to her and try to persuade her, or if she doesn't like the way of data presentation or representing her country, maybe we can, like Dr. Henry said, maybe we can collect data or present in a way that the country is de-identified or something.
Okay, and I did that, and she
refused.
Right.
Then there should be a settled pre-agreement.
How could you have a pre-agreement if this is happening after the fact?
Was there an agreement of collaboration from the start?
Yeah, but we can't go back in time.
So there was no agreement.
Of course not.
So should we contact her institution?
Okay, good thought.
But this would complicate it more.
Well, what other solution?
It depends who owns the data.
All right, who owns the data?
The institution or the principal investigator.
All right, so who owns the data? Good question.
I don't know.
What's the answer? Don't ask a question that you don't have an opinion to, okay? That's not allowed.
I want to know who owns the data.
Oh, well,
technically
who do
you own the
think
data. You own the data. You own the data, Maha, Dr. Maha.
Who?
The investigator, I mean the principal investigator. In this case, Dr. Maha or Dr. Tim.
In this case, the investigator owns the data?
Yeah.
But the patients are related to the place, to the institution, not to the investigator. I mean, if I'm the principal investigator, the patients are coming to Ain Shams University. They are not coming to Maha.
Okay.
But you are the caregiver, right?
So to some extent, the institution has right, of course.
So there's been several cases in which investigators from one institution would go take a job in another institution, and they wanted to take their samples with them, and the institution said, no, we own the samples. You collected the samples from while you were with our institution. We enabled you to do the research, and so the samples are ours. Anyway, in this case, I told the investigator, you have no right to withdraw the data. It's not your data. If you want the data withdrawn, you have to have the patients tell me they want the data withdrawn in writing. Of course, that never happened. So eventually, I did go to the institution, and I spoke with the Vice Dean of Research, and I said, you determine a solution. And he said, okay, give me the name of the investigator and contact information, and I'll talk with her. And a few weeks later, he came back and he said, listen, I spoke with her about this issue. I don't understand her concerns at all. And all I know is that good data needs to be published. So go ahead and publish the data.
Who was this person, Professor Henry?
What's that?
Who was the person? No, who was the person? Her supervisor, the head of
No,
the...
I think he was the director of the ethics committee, being also the vice dean of research. But he was the director of the ethics committee at this institution.
Yes, I see.
So anyway,
but this took a long. This issue delayed us from publishing our manuscript for almost 1 year.
So Professor Tamer, the journal didn't go easy with that issue, right? The journal
no. What happened with the first journal? After they gave a favorable review, in the interest of transparency, I told them about the issues, and they didn't want to make a decision. So I finally withdrew the paper from the journal and sent it to another journal. And at that time, I decided that these issues about authorship was not the issue of the journal, it's the issue of the institution. And if this issue is settled at the level of the institution, then it's no business of the journal. And so, and then it got published in this other journal. So this is a good issue about authorship that maybe we'll talk about in a future session. So let's take a break. Very good session about data, and maybe one never knew how important the issue of data is, but data is a valuable commodity, if you want to call it that, and it needs to be handled with care. Okay, very good. So why don't we, Zynab, thank you very much for bringing up this very important issue, and we'll reconvene at the top of the hour, and we have a presentation from Dr. Rahab about research methodology. So I will see you at that time. Okay? All right. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Zynab.
Dr. Zynab. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zynab. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Dr.